I want to talk to you guys about a certain behavior that many times will be a red flag. Not all the time, but many times will be a red flag. And that is people who make a huge deal about bad language. When they hear you say a bad word, they say, don't use that language around me. Hey, watch your language. Don't use that bad language. It's like they're still in elementary school. I remember when I was in elementary school, you would hear these kids. He said the SH word. He said the F word. He said the D word. And the biggest one was the F word, right? He said the F word. I mean, if it was the D word, it's like, okay, well, that's mildly bad, right? SH word. Oh, yeah. Well, he's getting into hot water. He said the F word. Oh, he's really naughty. And people who make a huge deal about bad language, they tend to be walking red flags. Not all the time. I want to stress that this is not always the case, but they tend to be red flags. Because there is a certain type of person that likes to use morals as a way to impose themselves on others. And everyone says bad words, right? Everyone has cussed. Everyone cusses. Everyone. And they know this. And because they know this, they know that they can they can attempt to use it against you. Oh, you said this bad word, oh, don't use that bad language around me. And all of a sudden they're principled and they're moral, and they have higher morals than you do. They have higher moral standards than you do. It reminds me of a video that I watched. It's a very sad video, but it's from the 1990s during the Bosnian-Serbian War that took place. Very, very bloody war. Very bloody. When it comes to the wars that took place in the Balkans, everyone talks about Kosovo because it was the Kosovo conflict that NATO used to justify bombing Serbia. But I would say that the war in Bosnia was probably the most brutal of all those conflicts that took place in the Balkans in the 1990s. But anyway, in this video, a Serbian soldier is beheaded. He is beheaded by Bosnians. He is a Serbian POW, and he is beheaded. And the Bosnians, and there's an Arab Muslim amongst these Bosnians. So let's just say the Muslims, right? Because they weren't all Bosnian. The Muslims tell this Serbian man to say Allahu Akbar. Say Allahu Akbar. Say that Allah is greater. And people say Allahu Akbar simply means God is great. Actually, it means Allah is greater. Greater than who? Greater than the Christian God, specifically. So they tell this Serbian man to say Allahu Akbar. And he says, go F yourself. And you hear this Muslim man say, hey, don't use that bad language. Hey, watch your language. Don't use that bad word. Don't use that bad word. And then they behead him. So it's like, you're judging this man because he said a bad word, and then you murder him. So it's like you want to commit murder, and you commit murder, but you're going to judge a man for saying the F word. It's sick, right? It's a very sick mindset. It's the mindset of the Pharisee. Jesus said this about the temple. Let's murder him. And it reminds me of Dennis Rader. Dennis Rader is a serial killer, and the reason why I say is because he's still alive. He's in prison right now, somewhere, I think in Kansas. And Dennis Rader was a serial killer who would break into people's homes, and he would take the woman, tie her up, and torture her. And I mean, it was very demonic stuff, very, very sick stuff. They called him the BTK killer. And one of the most disturbing individuals that I've ever read about, Dennis Rader. Well, while Dennis Rader was being a serial killer, he was also He was also going to church and giving off this facade that he was a family man and he was a man of God, and he would go to church with his family. He would make his family go to church with him every Sunday. He would go to the weekly Bible study. He was the president of his congregation. I mean, he was considered to be an upstanding citizen in his community. But he was also a cross-dressing serial killer. And people who knew Dennis Rader would say that when they were around Dennis Rader, it was like walking on eggshells. If you said a joke that he considered inappropriate, he would say, don't use that kind of language around me. Or if you would use a bad word, don't use that kind of language around me. Oh, he was very judgmental, he was very much so a moralist. He would try to give off this aura of moralism and being someone of good character. He would speak as though he had better morals than you did. He would speak as though he had superior moral standards. But the reality was that he was a cross-dresser who murdered people. And the one story that comes to mind is the massacre of the Otero family. Dennis Rader went into the home of the Oteros. This was back in the 1970s, and he murdered the husband, the wife, and the 2 children. And it's so horrific what this guy did. I don't even want to say it because it just makes me sick. But he murdered this family. He did some very, very sick things in the house. Very sick things. And he wrote about this fantasy that he had where the man that he murdered would be like his slave in heaven, and then the little boy would be his little sex slave in heaven. I mean, it's just demonic. It's sick. And the mom would be his sex slave, and the daughter would be the sex slave, and it was like the Islamic heaven, but way more disturbing. I mean, very, very sick stuff. And so he had this demonic worldview that his victims would be his slave, would be his slaves, his sex slaves in heaven, but then he would judge somebody for saying a bad word. So how can you try to give off this facade of moralism when you're literally committing the most horrendous of atrocities? How do you live with yourself? Well, the answer is very simple. These people like to, and it doesn't matter how evil they are, it doesn't matter how sick they are, it doesn't matter how deranged they are, how sadistic they are, how murderous they are, how full of bloodlust they are. A lot of these people will use morals to impose their will on others. It's a power thing. That's all it is. It's nothing but a power grab. Now, there are people who really believe that using bad language is a big deal, and they sincerely will tell you not to use that language around them. And, it's always best just to respect that and say, okay, fine, whatever. Don't try to be edgy. But I think that I know for a fact that there are people who use this way of, who use these sorts of expressions as a way to impose themselves on others. They use these expressions of moralism as a way to impose themselves. I am more moral than you. I want to control you. I don't want you to say these words because I want you to think in your head that I am better than you. You should follow me. It's that same Pharisaical spirit that murdered Christ. This man said this about the temple, or this man breaks the Sabbath. Meanwhile, they conspired to murder an innocent man. Anyway, I just want to get that out there. I was thinking about this today. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.